Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming tonight to this wonderful Hackney Society event. We've got a wonderful panel here to discuss co-housing. Now, co-housing is a very, very special intentional community, and I don't believe that enough people know about it, and that's really the catalyst for tonight's talk. Jude Tisdall actually works, lives, plays in New Ground in Barnet, and she will go through some of the details, and we will start with a short video which was made as part of the, what was the name of the?
It was funded by the Arts Council, shot in Ireland and in London. It's on reimagining elderhood, until it was re-age. And an architectural practice in Dublin, a man called Paul Flynn, was behind it. And he came and stayed with us at New Ground and worked with our architects, and this is the film that came out of that. There was 3 different young architectural groups working on it, and you're going to see some of it.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think just to have that we're not used to this venue. As you can see, we're not used to this venue. But we shall do our best to show you the full show as smoothly as we can. But we thought it would be best to start off with the short video. There'll have to be absolute silence because the sound is coming out of that box there. And it's also subtitled, which will help. So we're going to watch 10 minutes of that, and then we're going to go, I will just show a few slides to set the scene in action, and then Jude Tisdall will speak about her experience in New Ground. And we're delighted to have Stephen Willacy, architect and urbanist professor, with us all the way over from Aarhus for tonight. And he has got vast experience in urbanism and having worked in Denmark for most of his life as well. He'll be speaking in English, of course. And we have Kate Cornwall-Jones, head of development in Camden Council, and she has another insight in how can we get these things done? What is the government doing? What is the latest legislation from just April 2025? Because we want to encourage as much as possible co-housing, understanding of it, and then to have more of them built as an alternative way of housing ourselves. So please put your hands together for our team. And now we are going to start our video.
Opportunities and also create networks. So it's the start of something.
Excuse me 1 second.
When we saw the open call, we got quite excited about one particular phrase. So it was about
knowing how incredible it was when I was 20. I think it's about being present in your life. And I want to be with people who are committed to a community and a neighbourhood, and that's what I found here.
We got involved with older women's co-housing about 10 years ago, slightly more perhaps. It was our first fully co-designed co-housing project. We went through about 5 years together to get to planning and another 5 years to build. And it's been an amazing experience. It has informed our architectural practice hugely since. There were people asking, how on earth is this going to work? You've got 25 different people with different ideas. And to be honest, the answer from me was no idea. It might be quite difficult. It might be cat herding, I just don't know.
There's a good mix, there's a social mix, and there's an economic mix. Culturally, there's different people. We've got 2 Iranian women who are originally refugees living here. We have people with different artistic backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, different financial backgrounds, but we all kind of gel together most of the time. I always say most of the time because we're humans, There's a brilliant mix here of, and this is something we had to learn as well, between privacy and community. I can be quite social, but I'm very much a loner as well, and I like my space, and lots of people do, of course. But we've committed to making the community work as well. So getting that balance, that we had to learn that. There's a difference in flats. There's some 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom, but the social housing flats are dispersed around the development. They're all done to the same standard. everybody has a say. There's no difference, there's no exclusion. The women who started really wanted that, you know, they were social activists, they wanted this to be available for everybody, and so that was the reason.
I think it's quite important that older people are quite often thought not to need space, but in fact, because you spend more time at home, in some ways you need the space to have a hobby.
It was interesting to explain it to other people, and if people aren't allowed to express their own character and preferences and aspirations, then you don't have any diversity, because everything's the same. So diversity is made up of lots of more specific groups of people, which is really interesting for co-housing. And a successful, thriving town, village, city, quarter is a diverse, intentional community. Because the brief was specifically, to what extent can you get the residents to design it themselves, we were fascinated to see how that would work. So our calculation was, if it costs a bit of money, it's probably worth it in terms of R&D. The way it turned out, I think, and we've done 3 or 4 of these processes now, it didn't cost us any more than working conventionally with most clients would have cost us. I don't think it needs to be an expensive process.
A benefit for people now is they can see what we have done. You know, trying to explain to different councils, trying to explain the concepts, and they just didn't get it over years and years. Whereas now we've got the evidence, we've got the buildings, we've got films to show people.
And I think it was because it was against all the odds as well. I mean, gosh, did we have to fight to get it? I mean, the first thing that Barnet Council said was, you need social services, we don't have any, go and talk to social services, we can't give you anything. And we were saying, no, that isn't what we need. We are going to look after each other. We need less social services than most people living on their own might need.
I wish, in a sense, that I'd known about it when I was younger. I mean, I didn't get to know about co-housing until I was into my 60s. And I think I would have benefited from it even more if I'd come in younger.
When I was in my council flat before, all my family managed to buy their houses and I didn't. I always felt like I hadn't quite made it, if you like. But moving here, it doesn't matter that I'm a renter and nobody else has bought their flat. I feel just as important as the people that have bought their flats, because we all make those decisions together. Our priority is this community. So it's given me, I think my self-esteem has got better with my hearing problem and very shy. I wouldn't have done it, but you know, I thought, yeah, I'm going to do it. And say yes.
We're not in each other's pockets, you know, but we are there for each other when we need each other, as well as being able to socialise together.
Co-housing groups, even those, unlike our difficult characters, are fantastic clients because they have to reach decisions as a group. And the decision you get is the product of that. You don't get 18 different decisions. You get a group of people who have a common objective. And if they've started a co-design process, it gets more and more and more focused on the fabric of the building, how you're going to live there. And for us, it's the ideal client. You get all the commitment and engagement of a passionate person who's going to live in the place, but you don't get one wealthy person with lots of views constantly changing their mind because there is a discipline already. And so I'm a fan, still keen to do them and still doing them.
Like it tends to be like.
What we also have is we will be sharing the full video, which is I think about 40 minutes.
Yeah, about 35
minutes. Yeah, exactly. So Jude, I think it's best if you come in here now. Use the microphone. Come in now, and then we'll get the next studies.
I'll stay sitting because I want to read from my notes. I've made copious notes because I don't want to forget anything. There will be an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session.
Sorry, can I just say, are you going to be able to share the recording?
We're going to share the recording and the PDF of the
Perfect,
whole
thank you very much.
slides.
So we don't need to scribble away.
You don't have to make any notes.
It's
thank
audio
you.
video.
So that was a bit of a whistle stop tour showing a snapshot of what we achieved. It took a long time. But I'm going to tell you what are the main features of New Ground. There's 25 individual homes there of 1, 2 and 3 bedrooms. We're a mixed tenure development, and that means that 1/3 of our apartments are social rent. We had hoped to do 1/3 social rent, 1/3 shared ownership and 1/3 owned outright. But it became impossible. It almost became impossible to have mixed tenure, but the women who started it were determined. I wasn't there at the very beginning, but women who were social activists, they didn't want a development that was excluding. So that was one of the reasons it took so long, fighting planners, fighting everybody to get mixed tenure, but we got it. So 1/3 of our flats are social rent. We remain the only mixed tenure co-housing development for women over 50, 26 years old. And we have been fighting and supporting and pioneering, and we are still the only one. New Ground offers a model of later life living that is uplifting and empowering. And the co-design of the development was a pioneering collaborative process, planned to put the design, development tools and key decisions in the hands of the future end owners. That was the future resident, us. We moved in now almost 9 years ago. When the building was complete. Well, as I was sharing with everybody earlier, it wasn't really complete. If we hadn't moved in, we probably would never moved in. We moved in with the builders, and they still stayed with us for a year. But at the end of that year, we had our place. Each flat is completely self-contained. The common shared areas include a common house, which is used for communal meetings and meals, various classes, including yoga, Pilates, film nights, art classes, talks, a whole schedule of ever-changing events, and they're open to the wider community in our area. People come to all the things we put on. We have a communal laundry, a guest flat for friends and families to stay, and each apartment has its own private outside space, either a balcony or a terrace. And in addition, we have large communal gardens and a vegetable garden and orchard. We do realise how lucky we are. At the cost to rent the flats, the 8 social flat, is approximately £700 calendar month. That's for a 1-bedroom flat. That includes service charges and putting money into a sink fund. The purchase flats cost between, say, £390 and £500,000. That was 2 years ago. I think they've probably gone down a bit. I don't know why, but just moved so hard to get and that. It's not working. Can people hear? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
It's the recording. Of course. Okay. So when we moved in, we set up our own service charges. We decided we could manage the building. We got a managing agent to deal with things like compliance, but we set our own service charges, which are approximately £1,000 a year for a 1-bedroom flat, far below the average that people would pay in some kind of, in any other kind of commercial property. These charges include insurance, maintenance, cleaning of communal areas, and some gardening. The compliance contracts, and part of the service charges goes to a sink fund, and the sink fund is to cover any necessary repairs and lease requirements. For example, repainting the communal areas every 7 years. I have to say we've been there nearly 9 years and we haven't done it yet, but we will do. We also have a fund for improvement and new projects. We have an ongoing green project. We've just dug up the lawns and sunk 2 water tanks to harvest water for the garden, and then created a clover lawn over that. We're expanding the solar panels we have so that all communal areas are sourced from those panels. And our goal is to continue developing our space to make it sustainable both for us and indeed for the women who come after us. That's important. So how did we get to New Ground and how long did it take? Well, the journey started back in 1999 when a group of women met in the pub somewhere in King's Cross and began talking how they might want to live when they got older, when work things change, when family change, when situation changes. In your 50s and 60s, the things that were needed in your 30s and 40s change. And I'm sure you know that one, you know, we've all sat around at different times with a group of friends and a bottle of wine and think, oh, wouldn't it be great if we got together when we're older and buy a big house and all live together? Well, that was our vision, and it became our mission. And our mission was to build a neighbourly community of women over 50 based on mutual support and shared values. From the very beginning, it was important that we created a mixed tenure community, which I've already explained. And it was to ensure that whatever we achieved was sustainable for those women who came after us. And then there was the development stage. The first development stage was to develop and involve a community of end users, the women themselves. That's important. It's so important that the community, I think, is built before you can start thinking about it. You need committed people, invested people. So that was the first stage, to develop that. And then we wanted to search for a development partner, because we knew we'd need that, you know, to buy land to build, and then to find a site. We found and lost 5 sites over about 6 or 7 years. And in the end, we had to employ a site finder to find the site that we ended up on. And we found finance. The Roundtree Foundation gave us money for that beginning of that development, because it took money to look at sites, to get people to look at them, to get surveyors to look at them. And then we researched other communities. We spent time in the Netherlands and in Denmark, where co-housing is, you know, it's almost a norm, isn't it? You know, in those areas. But we were speaking to people who hadn't a clue what we were talking about, and quite honestly, sometimes we really didn't know what we were talking about either. Then the second development stage, to build partnerships. We needed a housing association to develop and finance a site. That was something we were told we had to find. We also needed a housing association who would lead on the social housing flats. And we had to find the right architects who were willing to enter into a collaborative design process. And we were so fortunate with the partners we found. Hanover Housing Association, which is no longer, it's now Anchor, I think, funded the development. The Tudor Trust gave us a grant of 1.2 million towards the cost of the 8 social flats. We negotiated with Housing for Women Housing Association, who were then gifted the Tudor Trust money towards the cost of those 8 flats. And the architects we found were Pollard, Thomas and Edwards. Patrick Devlin, who you heard on that video, was our architect. And we worked collaboratively with him on design. I have a photo here you can look at later about what we did, how we worked together. We had workshops. He gave us lots of options. He asked us what we wanted, you know, what were things we wouldn't do without, and what we would get, what we could get if we had our wish. And then somewhere in the middle of all that we met. But all the way along, we were part of the planning. So although we had a long wait, we were also truly, truly fortunate in having these various partners supporting us, listening to us, pushing us along when it got hard, and I don't think this happens very often. So in that way, although it was a long, long haul, we were fortunate. And even with all that support, it took 17 years to achieve our vision, 17 years. It was really challenging. Of course, people came and went into our group. There's over 250 women that came in and out at different points. You know, women over 50, you know, some 60, 70, you can't hang around forever in the hopes that you're going to have somewhere that you want to live in. When we finally moved into New Ground, there was just one woman from the very original group back in that pub in 1999 that moved in with us. Her name was Shirley Meridine. She was fantastic. She didn't give up once. She was tenacious. She would talk over, under and around every planner and every money person that we met. She was a powerhouse. And she moved in and she stayed with us for 6 years. She was 93 when she died a couple of years ago. And even as a couple of weeks before she died, she was still worrying, oh, is this going to work? Are you going to make sure this is going to work for the next lot of work? I mean, literally on her dying bed, she goes, don't you forget, you can't stop, any of you, you've got to keep pushing for this. But alongside all those challenges that I've just talked about another time, there were some advantages because it allowed us to build a cohesive and committed group. Time to decide and discuss what our values were and what our policies would be, what our ethos of living together would be. And we created a lot of policies that actually were very idealistic. When we moved in, lots of them had to be changed because we have to live in a place. It gave us time to quantify our individual skills and how they would work in their community together. And as I've already said, building the social architecture of a group like this is equally important to the building. So what impact do we think we've had? Well, we've demonstrated that this can be done by creating, in collaboration with our architects, the space we wanted to live in as we age. We did that. Our spaces are, as far as possible, age-proofed. We have wider doors, automatic doors for communal areas, lift, wet room, walk-in showers. We demonstrated the contribution of older women to society. Research shows that living in community reduces the demands on social care. This way of living, whatever the age group, can help compensate for the often loneliness of modern society in the West. So I'm talking of course about the group we created, which were old, but there's many groups that are starting up for intergenerational. So a lot of what I'm saying is relevant to that, but of course I'm talking about my particular group. As I've already said, there's a growing problem of loneliness and isolation, particularly in older people. And this has a resultant effect on physical and mental health, which is a call on the public purse. Research has shown that living in community reduces these problems. At New Ground, we are a community who look out for each other. We have a mantra that we do not look after each other, we look out for each other. Having neighbours who are committed to supporting each other is a huge benefit. And just to finish, we were fortunate to be able to invent the future we wanted and needed. But looking forward, how can other people do that? There needs to be a concerted and coordinated effort by government and forward planners to consider societal changes and to plan for age-proof homes in the future. They need to support groups who are invested in developing potential communities. Changes in society means the way we're living is more varied. The number of people who are divorced, who never married, and the number of people living alone is increasing significantly. A quarter of all people aged over 50 and now live alone, and there's been a particular significant increase for men aged 65 and over living alone. By 2043, it's predicted that almost 4.5 million people aged 65 and over in the UK will live alone. And there is a site, UK Cohousing Network. I think that's also on one of the slides. They've put together a manifesto for the government, and they're asking for 5 things to enable projects like this to work. They're asking for a 150 million guarantee fund to level the playing field for community-led housing. Co-housing fits into community-led housing. Support for Growth Lab to nurture housing innovations to scale. To allow 5% of large new sites to be allocated to community-led housing. A legal definition of what co-housing is. And to acknowledge and support the full delivery arm housing to include co-housing, co-ops, land trust, self and custom build as a sector in its own right. And you can access that manifesto on their website. There's lots more I could say, but I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions at the end, and maybe some of the things I was going to say will come back. So I'm going to hand over now to Ray. Thank you.
Full screen. Play.
Where's that chat that I was earlier? Can you just show us how to get the...
There's a little play.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. And that's, you can have it. Oh. That ran that. Okay. Am I okay? I'm Angela Brady, Brady Mallalieu Architects, and in the 1980s I had the opportunity to go to Copenhagen. So we've done that one. I had the opportunity to go to Copenhagen and study co-housing for 18 months as a postgrad, and it was an absolute wonderful opportunity to see a new type of housing. One of the girls in my class, Maria Angeles, was married to Jan Goodman Hoye, a bit older than her. But Jan, in the late 60s and 70s, was so dissatisfied with what we are today, I would say, very dissatisfied with, is the lack of alternatives of housing models if you want to live together in a community. There was very little in Denmark at the time. So he wrote an article, as did Bodil Grå, who was a very good writer. And she said, you know, children should have 100 parents. In other words, you're not just stuck in your own little niche nuclear family, very much like 1950s American style, is what I would call it. But it meant that there were alternatives here. Is anybody out there interested, they said, in an alternative way of living? So these two articles that they had written, and the missing link between utopia and the outdated one family house, that's what we call today the nuclear family. So anyway, I went out to Squaw Planet and I met Jan Goodman Hoye, and then he said, well, there are 22 boofdeledskever, which is co-housing, go and visit them. So I visited them all over that 18 months, and my eyes were really opened up to this fantastic way of living, where you knew all of your neighbours. You knew the names of all your neighbours and their kids and parents. You ate together. It was more economical to live together. You had all of the community, like a small village, but it could be just outside a city, or it could be in the city, or wherever it might be. But it's where people come together, and if they were musicians, then in the co-house they would favour musical instruments, so that would be the influence. There were artists that got together, there were teachers, there were writers, there were all different types of groups that got together, and I thought this is the way of living. Then back in Ireland, and then when I came to the UK in 1987, thought, well, let's get these things going. But it's harder than you think to come up with, to say, okay, look what the Danes are doing. You know, the Germans have started, the Dutch are doing it. Why aren't we doing it here? And that's why it's so wonderful when I went to visit Jude Tisdall in New Ground and saw their wonderful facilities and premises and the people and how they live together in a commune. I thought there should be more of these. So let us hope that this is another catalyst today to get people thinking, to get people learning a little bit more about alternative ways of living that we can all choose if we want to. You're going to talk about some of the architects. Van Kunsten, I visited 3 of their schemes, very good architects. And then over here in UK, Moore Architects have done the well-known Marmalade scheme in Cambridge. Worth a visit for a weekend or just, you know, a day. Is Melis Howard here? Melis, hi. Melis, I've got a few of your slides here. Melis Howard is from Archeo, and she's given me a couple of slides. She gives very good presentations herself, and I hope you're going to join our discussion for a couple of your schemes. But this one here, Angel Yard in Norwich, you will talk about, I hope, Melis. And then we have your co-design toolkit. How do you do it? Well, Melis and team have actually got their own way from their experience on how you can actually get one of these off the ground, and people can ask questions afterwards, and we'll invite Melis to join. And then the 6 different types, Melis, which I hope you will go into a little bit later, but not for right now. So this is for the website information. So this is about community-led housing information to follow up, and then, as we mentioned earlier, the UK co-housing group. So they're all very active and very big and very forthcoming. But going back to Denmark, I invited Stephen Willacy, who I've known for many years, to come and talk to us about the influence of the co-housing, the boofdeledskever, where we are today, the numbers, the statistics, and what a wonderful way it is to live. Stephen.
Well, you've had a very nice introduction to the Danish system. Thank you for that. I've quite a few slides, so I'll probably zip through them. You may be wondering, he speaks with a northern accent. I'm actually from the Lake District, near Kendal, a village called Sedgwick. But I've been living in Aarhus, the second largest city in Denmark, for the last 40 years. So I have a bit of experience. I was a chief city architect there for nearly 9 years. I have my own practice today. The structure of the talk is built around the tendencies which are happening. One of the reasons for these sort of projects being able to happen is because of the non-profit housing system, the almene bolig we have in Denmark. And the three main principles behind those. The development of co-living community typologies, there are 5 or 6 of those, which are happening simultaneously. And the Danish examples, both rural and urban. And then finally a toolkit type of introduction to ways of working. So, there's a great demand for co-housing communities, which far exceeds the supply of housing communities. It's very popular, and it's very difficult to get things going, but there's a momentum now. There's an increased interest from professional market players, developers.
Steve, just move
You're moving out of shot here.
Move up the edge of the...
I don't want to crowd out.
Yeah.
This idea of building a turnkey project, finished projects, which you can move into, whilst the ones developed by non-profit housing associations are often collaborative based. There's several initiatives to actually promote this type of work, the toolkits and ways of working, which are very popular, also with some of the pension companies. And there's also this greater consciousness relating to living more sustainably. And that's also in terms not just economic, environmental and social, but the social well-being of citizens. So that's a very important dimension that's happening now. So the 3 main principles behind working with non-profit housing, I'm not going to go, you've got these slides afterwards. I don't want to read them up, but it's about the people, it's not about making profit. The housing associations, let's call them that, the rent that you pay is like the one you have. It covers the operational maintenance and investment costs, if have a bank loan for a mortgage, and when that's paid off, it's a financial stable model which allows you actually, after 30 years of back payment, it goes into a national fund, which later on can be used to finance the renovation and development and renewal of your housing association. It's a kind of a very sustainable loop, which I think is beautiful. And these types of houses are built all over the country, at all 98 councils around Denmark. And the beautiful thing about them is each housing association has their own democracy. It's like having an executive board. Representatives from the people living there make all the decisions, and there have to be some unity around things. So there's these different types of what do you call inter-age living communities, mixed age group, intergenerational. The biggest group which is developed is senior living communities, both rural and urban. I have examples of these. And there's eco communities. I'm not going to, I'll show examples of this because these have quite different profiles. Student communities and construction collectives. And that's like, in Germany they have this Baugruppe. People who are go together, and this reduces the cost of their projects by not having going out. They have they're running their own projects, project managing it. And then there's generation houses, where you have lots of different age groups, different types of citizens living together. But what's common to them all is that roughly 10%, you take roughly 10% of the normal living area to shared areas. it's quite a big game changer. Loneliness is one of the biggest threats we're facing. They say it's worse than cigarette smoking in terms of deaths. A lot of people living alone. Currently, roughly 50% of Danish population live alone, singles or choice, or divorced or lost their partner in their age. And there's a lot of students over the age of 18 living alone. There's a growing concern for loneliness amongst younger generation, especially online communities and things like this. People are not getting out. There've been 3 primary growth periods here, and you can see these different ones here. These are the ones which Angela talked about, actually. And I'll show a couple of examples of that. But there's also this one here, up towards 2008, with the financial crisis. And then there's a big move again at the moment, which is happening. So there's a big flow. There are over 400 co-living communities in Denmark. It's roughly 10,000 homes. 152 mixed age group co-living communities. I say co-living, not co-housing, because there's just lots of different ways of living, right? There's 235 senior co-living communities and 30 collectives or eco-communities. So you can see there's quite a nice diversity. But there's been a big move here, roughly 15 to 20 new ones being built in Denmark over the last 5-6 years, which is really encouraging. But it's only 3% of the whole housing market. So, something's happening. And with an ageing community, I think this will definitely be of interest for many types. So when it all started, this one is designed by Van Kunsen. This is one of the best architect companies in Denmark. Go and see their home page. It's really interesting. It's one of the first ones here, but this is a really tight-knit, small village-type community, low scale, pedestrianised, vehicles on the outside, and no cars allowed in unless you're moving in, or handicapped, of course, disabled. And the whole idea was that you actually making food together. You could have a small library, you could have shared spaces, you could have an extra room if you have guests coming in, or party space, all the different age groups living together. And this is a wonderful picture. I think a few of us here can recognise ourselves there. The hair, the clothes, the model here, smiling faces across, and the kids. But this is a kind of a community design process, and lots of them working around models. This is the one which I think is probably the most famous, in as much as instead of having a street or this one is covered. It becomes an arcade type community with beautiful garden, conservatory, different types of living spaces, all connected under one roof. And so it's a very nice concept here. With a large central space, bringing people together in the corner or the hinge, everyone can walk up there, and the different scales. It's a very nice scheme. This is a very recent scheme by Van Kunsen in a place called Wu, very close to Aarhus, out in the countryside, greenfield site. But this is a community. This is designed and financed by Pension Denmark and Rio Dania, which is a philanthropic fund, foundation. And it's rented accommodation. And these people, citizens here, work together on the design of this project. And this is one of the shared buildings here, and the Pension Denmark taking recyclability and choice of materials to the next level. And all this is reuse of saw-off wood or metal cladding from different projects, and of course the interiors as well. So the whole thing is sustainable. Water collection. Another one just outside of Aarhus again, on the countryside housing estate here. 52 two-storey houses, and these are all designed about the car-free area. The cars are over here. It's just a wonderful area. I've been out wandering around this. kids all over the place with tricycles, prams. You don't have to worry about it. The children just wander around. And they're being monitored by all the different parents and groups around there. Another one which is on Zealand, very inspired by the Norwegian housing projects, with a choice of colours. The architects try to make this mix and match kind of feel, so it's not monotonal. And I think it's worked out very well. They had many meetings about the way they should organise the plan. The shared facilities here, small parking pockets on the outside, and these small clusters of housing around village greens. Another one in August, this is student housing. This building here, this is one I dealt with as a city architect. They came originally with a scheme with we're going to demolish this building, wooden frame building, wattle and door. I said no, have to retain that and also make it a thatched roof. But you can make different types of accommodation around it, but trying to work in this scale. And these units here, single person or two person units, single person costs £400 a month. That's including service. I mean student residence, right? I think it's that. There's a very nice feel about it. It's almost going back to Christian Andersen time, really. It's on the outskirts of Orr, so it's a country type of feel. And the existing building is used parties, shared eating. Each room has its own small kitchenette, but they can also arrange to organise themselves. This is one of the big players coming in now. It was designed with a group called Tetris, which had been bought by Enric, and they've built several of these projects, different places, mostly on Zealand. There's another group called Eco Village. There's 4 or 5 of these types of companies, but this is an atrium, like this, built of wood, roughly 1,000 square meters. I don't know the price of the rent, but you can see there's different age groups living here. It's quite impressive. This is all part of the scheme design of it. Another one, this is Eco Community. This is 45 minutes drive from Moors. People living here are not allowed to have a debt when they build. So they save up and then they build. Or they build as much as they can and then add on. But one of the wonderful things about this is that it's very different types of architecture going on here. And one of the families here started a restaurant called Moment. It's just won a Michelin star. It's all ecological. It's a Nordic kitchen, using local materials and seasonal food, materials for vegetations and things on the menus. Another one which is very close to my heart is the Centre Board, and that's the new architect school that's just been completed. But this is a small community called Institute X, and they basically started building a community using containers. They don't comply with building regulations, which has become so established now that it's causing a bit of concern with the authorities. We sort of blind eye. But the main building that they have here, they said the council, I say we, said if they want to continue living here, they have to comply with fire regulations. And we'll be able to support them financially, but they also have to get money themselves to be able to do it. But it's sort of kicking in here that this is sort of self-grown, and you probably recognise it from places in Berlin. Matt Peter Lausen has been the chief instigator of this area. His wife is from one of those groups in Berlin. But there's a lot of new VAT registered company startups happening here because their rents are so low. But there are people coming in are also screened slightly. And this thing about screening the types of people coming in, it happens on all the other projects too. And this could be quite problematic. Right? Who decides who to come in if someone leaves? Or if there's lots of vacant rooms in a period, maybe the private owners are not screening, which can cause a lot of disgruntlement with some of the people living there. Another one here, a small group here, 9 homes in Odense. This is where H. Christian Andersen Centre is, right next to this. This is a construction collective, this Bauhofer. They went together. It was a very complicated process to enable this. It's one of the first examples. How, you know, in terms of laws, how to make it work. It took a while for them to do this, but it's worked out. There's Praxis architects who designed this. It's very popular. One of the most recent ones by Van Kunsen, this is on a harbour area on a place called Kuru. It's called Fellersby. It's a shared building, or collective construction. I think there's 20 families went together on this initially, working with Van Kunsen, and they managed to get this project off the ground, to get the site together with the council. And they're all still living there. And it's a fantastic design. It's all these shared balconies running around, shared staircases, entrances, lots of different age groups here. It's mixed, intergenerational. It's quite very, very popular. This lady, I came there, and I was looking, obviously vacant, not knowing where to go. And she said, would you like to have a look around? And she showed me around. She was from the beginning of the project. In her staircase up to her apartment, the elevator space, she's instigated a small library where you can come with your own books and swap, you know, constantly changing. It's a very nice idea. And she lives up on the upper floor level. And you know, this beautiful shared kitchen area and lots of different activities going on. All the different age groups can help each other. The elderly can look after the children if some of the parents are going out. It's a very nice way of mixing and working here. And almost, so there's not an S on there. This is the first example of what they call a generations house. Here you can see there are 5 different types of community housing here, or communities living here. Family housing. This is a housing association involved in this, called Brabant Housing Association, or non-profit. Youthful housing, housing for the disabled, elderly housing, a nursing home, and these different communities. And there's also built here kindergarten. Because one of the things they found is that the kids love the older people, and the older people love being around the small children. So it's not on this picture here, but that's a fantastic community developing here. And this is part of the 5% of this project economically has to go into art. So this is an art project designed in the ground floor area where people walk in and out. And I put this one in because this is a very recent example in Hamburg, in Hafen City, by the architects group called Werk. They designed this from a competition. They've made 27 tailor design apartments for obviously quite wealthy people. But there's also shared facilities, there's office spaces underneath, library, concert space, yoga studio, sauna, roof gardens, and roof gardens are also, I think, accessible for people from the outside. But this whole combination is inspired by the idea of the bee family, how bees work and collaborate together. It's a nice narrative, and this is an example of this community area. So this toolkit, I mean, it's very small text here, but this whole idea of making the social communities, how to do that, the thresholds between the private areas and the semi-private and the public areas are very sensitive ideas. And it's not everybody suits this. So you have to be very careful how you design it. So the relationship with the private and the public is essential. This whole idea of putting down on consumption, sharing, shopping together, maybe cooking together, workshop facilities, this whole idea of sharing does actually mean that you don't have to have a drill. Everyone doesn't have to have a drill. You can share one, and you can have a workshop space. Also, by reducing the amount of area building for each unit, means that you can maybe have a larger communal area, which is maybe cheaper to coordinate. So this whole idea of sharing economies is important. Yeah, I've just mentioned this. This whole idea of the close-knit community being able to keep an eye on each other. You hear stories of people who die in their apartments, and people don't know they've died. But here in communities like this, you can actually get to know each other, and you think, oh, what's she doing today? Well, anyone seen her? You go around, knock on the door, and be a busybody, of course. But it's comforting. I think it's a very nice concept. But I know myself, it will take me a while to get used to. I've been living in my own house now for 40 odd years. And I think, it will take a while. At times, all the kids have moved away from home. Nesting really, this big house. I just don't have to kill my darlings and move on. And this could be a way forward. So this whole idea of making casual encounters a social aspect of it, I referred to it along the way. And I think the architect at the rear of the room, Melis, should be able to inform more about this. But there's lots of things going on in terms of this in Denmark. There's lots of literature about this, and also quite a lot of research going on into what's working, what's not, and I'm following that too. So 3 pointers. Remember private life, living less and share more, and remember it's not for everyone. Yeah, thank you.
Utopian, hard work, but utopian, that's been talked about. I'm going to bring us back down to earth. There's a housing crisis in London. Camden Council, who I work for, but I'm here in a personal capacity. We own 33,000 homes. Most of them need work, but we are determined to keep delivering affordable housing as much as we, in the best ways, in the ways that we can. And community investment programme is a way in which Camden has sought to manage its assets and its sites to create new affordable housing in London. We've built over 17,000 homes in the last 10 years, of which 70% are affordable. This is the Bourne Estate, which was an extension of one of our estates in the south of Camden, and there's loads of examples I could talk to you about. Somers Town, we have a phased redevelopment of Somers Town, which has delivered new homes, schools, community spaces and landscaping, and it's all been self-funded, and it's funded through the sale of private homes or land. It's about regeneration, building communities, but fundamentally it's about delivering affordable housing. We do direct delivery, building our own homes is the way we would prefer to do it, but that's challenging in terms of grant and borrowing. We're entering into partnerships at the moment with developers to share the borrowing and the risk. We're looking at ways of acquiring homes that have been built by other people. We've set up our own housing companies which have access to more grant and borrowing. We've also, in Somerstown, we got planning permission. There were 7 plots in the master plan. One of the plots had all the private housing on that plot. It's a 26-storey tower next to St Pancras Station. And we sold that land, and the funds that we got from selling that land enabled us to build a school and 44 social homes for social rents, and we've also got a small sites programme. And on that small sites programme, we've identified pockets of land, unused pockets of land across our land ownership across Camden, and we're looking to sell some of those sites without planning permission to private anybody who wants to pay us to build on them, and we're also looking to develop those sites for 100% social rent using the value we get from sites that we sell and GLA grant. Camden is interested in being innovative, and it wants to support it's very interested in the way it consults with its communities and involving residents in the design of their homes. And one of the ways in which it's thought to be innovative is it identified a particular site in West Hampstead that they would be suitable for a disposal to a community land trust. And I'm going to talk a bit in more detail about that, because I think community land trusts are one way in which you could develop a co-housing scheme. You could do straightforward, a community land trust doesn't have to be co-housing, but it's certainly probably one of the best mechanisms at the moment in London to deliver that sort of opportunity. So community land trust, it's a mutual benefit society. In my mind, it goes back to how the original origin of building societies. People get together, they want to help each other, and so they join together to work together to give a mutual benefit. So it's actually, community land trusts are defined in the Housing and Regeneration Act. They're about getting together, but there is actually quite an important legal definition. They must have a purpose. They must have this purpose, which is to provide a benefit to the local community. And they must be structured so that profits benefit the local community, not individuals, and the trust is controlled by its members. So that's the way I see it as being like the original mutual societies, which there are a few left. So what's up there? So this Daleham Gardens is the site that we offered to. So this is Daleham Gardens. So NW3 CLT expressed interest in this site when we took it. We advertised this site saying we're looking for a CLT. Would you like anybody be interested? And NW3, who we already knew about the site, expressed interest, and we started negotiating directly with them. They appointed an architect and came up with a scheme that has 14 homes. The condition of our discussion was that they must have 50% affordable. I'm interested in when you say we had to persuade them to have mixed tenure. We wouldn't have got planning permission without mixed tenure. And the shared area is a large garden to the rear. So the next steps for them, they've got planning permission, and it was a really tough committee. I mean, there was a lot of objection. I think perhaps the unknown idea of what was a community land trust. There was a lot of objection. It was in West Hampstead, so there's a lot of NIMBYism. Oh, sorry, I'm not representing the council, but that's my view of the objections. But they have planning consent. They have planning consent for the scheme, and they're now in the process of agreeing terms to borrow money for the entity. They've got a legal entity, so they can borrow money if they can persuade somebody. They've got no collateral. They've just got this site that they've got an agreement to lease. They're talking to a building contractor, and they're talking to a housing association who will purchase the 2 homes for social rent, and they want the housing association to be their managing agent for the whole building. and they would retain the freehold. There will be 6 homes for sale, outright sale, and there will be, they'll get receipts from the 6 of the affordable homes will be discounted market sale, so that will be basically shared ownership, and then they will sell, as I said, the social rent homes to a social landlord. They are qualifying for a GLA grant. They're looking for donations. So if you've got any spare, and they'll be seeking private finance to fund the development period and against the rents that they're getting. So I think the thing that makes it so this co-design has gone. They've worked closely as a group with their architects. The thing that will enable them to be sort of people who are not necessarily going to live there will be involved in the allocation process. And it's quite interesting because the allocation process has had to be approved by the planning committee. So some of those things that you talked about, like kind of is it controversial, the screening process, it actually has to be a very transparent process, and it has to have very clear criteria. And whilst people will be interviewed, they must be in housing need, they must have a local connection, and they must join be members of them, join the CLT. And they have to, it's interesting, they have to have a maximum income of 90,000, which is the cap on for this shared ownership household income. But they must actually also be able to demonstrate that they can pay, that they will not default on their loans. So, and the homes for private sale will be sold in the market. There is a hope that people will join the CLT, but they don't have to. So for Camden, it was quite a risky thing. We've got a site, we're going to sell it for a discounted price, so the price agreed was 1.3 million. It would have been about 5 million if it had been 14 private sales, so there was a significant discount. So are we going to we've got a group who've never built any housing before, they've never commissioned an architect, they've never borrowed money. Are we going to get what we want? And so there's a lot of thought put into it, and in the various reports, the decision-making reports, you can see some of the council's considerations, but having thought about them and having thought of ways to mitigate them, they've gone ahead. And so the agreement to lease has been signed, and when the other conditions, as I said, they've got the finance, they've got a builder, and they've found a housing association, then they will own the building, they will own the land, and they will be able to commission a contractor. So that's about how CLT would work, is working in Camden, and I think it's a very powerful model, and actually so does the London Assembly and the MHCLG. The London Assembly have written a report urging the Mayor to put more money into it. There was some funding in 2018 allocated, which has now all been used up, and they would like the Mayor to prioritise putting more funding into community-led organisations, and that they should start using the GLA land for CLTs, like actually specifying sites, a bit like Camden has done. There is some concern that CLTs don't represent Londoners, and they would like to be looking and making sure we collect data on who's accessing this housing, and that everybody, all Londoners are represented, particularly black and global minority groups, who are not obviously joining the CLT groups that there are in London at the moment. And I think that's a very important aspect of the work going forward, is to make sure that underrepresented groups, women, older people, queer people, are represented in the CLTs. The Ministry of Housing and Communities and MHCLG, it's one aspect of their approach to delivering this aspiration of 1.5 million homes in 5 years. So they've specified 20 million. I think that's not going to go very far, but they are hoping that it will attract much funding from the private sector. But it is a way in which, at national government and local government, this way of delivering housing is seen as cost effective. And why shouldn't it be? Somebody else, if community people do all the work for you and you are assessing the risk carefully, then it sounds like a good deal. Just like you said, it doesn't cost necessarily, your architect said, it doesn't necessarily cost any more to do, especially if people are putting in a lot of time for free. I think that the key thing about it is that, again, as you said, you need to do it. I'm going to go back to the sort of Camden motto. It has to be not for self but for all, because the 200 people, as you said, only one person who started with the idea moved into the house, but it is in itself something that we as professionals, or I feel that we can contribute to, and I think it's definitely a way of delivering co-housing in London.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We're going to just have a question, well, discussion among ourselves here, and I'm going to throw it to the floor. So we've got, is it 15 minutes, Larry? 15?
I should think between 8:30 and 9:15 people will want to.
Yeah, or even that door, Kate. That was allowing a bit of air.
Just on the housekeeping front, I shut the back door because the aircon kicked in. It was quite noisy. I opened it.
But that door's allowing some. Definitely open that.
Melis, will you just put in the chair there? Melis Howard from Archeo, young architect and very involved in co-housing. Actually, Melis, we showed a couple of your projects there. Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing. Could you just come over beside me?
Where should I go?
Just here, stand beside me.
Oh, okay. I'm also working on some of the small sites with Camden, so this is a double, and I'm a Hackney resident, so I've triple attack here. So yeah, we're working. I similarly took a trip to Northern Europe a few years ago, inspired by some of their co-housing schemes. And then I introduced myself to an amazing company called Town, who you may have heard of. They were the developers of Marmalade Lane. And let's just say I slightly forced myself on them. I said, I really want to be involved in this kind of progressive living, this shared living. I feel like it's how we should all be able to live. And so, fortunately, I've been working on a number of projects with them since then. And the one on the slide in Norwich is called Angel Yard, and that came about where residents from Norwich bought a site together, and then they employed Town to be their developers, and we are their architects. And there, similarly, the housing is mostly flats. It's an intergenerational scheme, a few homes, mostly flats, with a shared courtyard in the centre, and it very much architecturally responds to the historic context of that part of Norwich. But currently, and so that scheme has planning, quite tricky in terms of planning in a historic part of Norwich, and we were trying to build maybe 1 story higher than the planners wanted. But we have done, I think we've delivered a scheme that in terms of sustainability and kind of urban placemaking is really great. Right now, I'm absolutely frantically busy on another co-housing scheme with Town in Hemel Hempstead. And all of these projects have slightly different arrangements. This one is Crown Estate land, but they're a huge land, the biggest landowner in the country, and they're saying, right, we have a lot of land to develop. In fact, they have this huge acres neighbouring our quite small site. How can we look at co-housing as the instigator of community? So you know when you build a new place, what is the community that's there? In Holland and other countries, often co-housing comes first, sets the tone for a place, and they're trying to take that approach. And that one, they're looking for residents. If you want in 5 years' time to move to the edge of Hemel Hempstead, Norwich and Angel Yard also. And there are interesting examples of co-housing in Hackney, like Copper Lane, etc. Is that a good run through?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Melis. I think that what you can see through the examples that everybody has given is that there is definitely a growing need for this. It's not a trend. I think there's a growing need, and that with our population becoming more elder, as in your statistics also for Denmark, but certainly the older women's housing, a co-housing group, we can see that it can really work. And I think that the statistics and the research that show that because people live together in a community and you have all the advantages because it's going to be cheaper, because you'll be eating together as well, it's more sociable, it's more friendly, you will live longer and healthier lives, and I think that's been a proven statistic in all of the co-housing that we have looked at. So Jude, I want to ask you, when yours took about 18, 19 years to get off the ground, and you lost a lot of people along the way because they had immediate housing needs. What advice would you give now to the newer groups that want to get together? I know you bring people in and you give great talks. What's your advice for, let's say, a group here now wanted to start and live in one?
Well, first of all, I think there's much more opportunity. I mean, we've just heard, Kate talking and you talking about town. Town have done so much. We have nobody. I don't think it will take somebody in the next group 19 or 20 years. But in fact, 19, 20 years. We were completely green. We just had a wish, and a desire. But I don't think there are hubs now with information. Town is doing an awful lot. Francis at Marmalade Lane does an awful lot. And in the way I talk about things, I know that town go out and talk. Listening to what Camden are trying to do and are doing, I mean, I didn't realise that was happening. It's brilliant. And if other councils take that lead, the one thing I'd say, I know I'm kind of going off your question, I'm going off your question. You say the small sites, making small sites available, and that they don't have planning, but it would be such a huge move forward if council got their small sites and gave planning, and then made it. I know that's
what we commissioned our kids to do.
Sorry?
So we've got a big small sites programme. We've got a number of architects. We've commissioned architects to get planning on those sites.
Oh, fantastic. I misunderstood. But what I would say is to get a group of people together who want to do this. And I think you said it's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. And I know what I found difficult when I moved into New Ground was creating the balance between privacy and community. I mean, that was a hard thing to do. I can be very outgoing like most people, but I also can be very much, don't talk to me today. And we all have to learn that. I always say it was like, the first, when you're in a relationship or a marriage or whatever, a relationship for the first, say, year or two, you're kind of, touching base, getting to know each other. We had to do that with 26 people. It was like being married to 25, 26 people for me in the first year, because I came into it the last year, I didn't have that kind of run-in period with people. But we did it, and we learned, and somebody else talked about learning about the rhythm of somebody. We learned that. We only eat together once a week, because it becomes too much, to eat more often. And we don't all eat together every week. But going back to your question, I'm going off, please. Going back, it would be to get the right people together. If you've got the right people together and they're tenacious, and then you find the support of something like the things that are now going on, then it's possible. I think getting forward funding is difficult, but I know that there's some building societies now. I know I'm actually having a meeting with Ecology Building Society this week. There are more building societies beginning to fund things like this. We had to find all our funding at the initial stage, and then we got a housing association. But I think it's easier. I think get the group, find out about your forward funding, and get in touch with the town.
Yeah, excellent. Stephen?
I noticed that most of the projects would see the 2 or 3 stories high. And
Devon Gardens is 6.
Yeah, but I think that's where we have to be. We have to scale up.
Yeah.
And it's this whole idea, the one I showed in Crewe by Bancompson is a really interesting one, because they're working up to 8, 9, 10 stories high. And how do you make community in the different levels? Make spaces where people can meet or accidentally meet. And I think the lady who started the library on the ground floor near the elevator and the staircase, this is like...
The thing is, I was thinking that's a fire hazard. With my landlord's hat on, I'd be thinking, get rid of that because it's not compliant with fire regulations. But
it's in the UK.
Yeah.
I know.
But there's ways of getting around that. But it's just, I think this is where the housing needs, in places in our cities, in Denmark and in the UK, London especially, we have to think of intensification, intensity somehow. It's not going to happen just on the street.
Co-housing, of course, is not to be confused with this latest trend, I call it, of co-living. I chair the design review panel in Croydon. So we see a lot of large schemes. So they will come to our pre-app panel, and many of them are for very tall buildings, and they're called co-living. In other words, it's a smaller 30, 35 square metres, not a 50 square metres as the London plan. And they say, oh, well, there's shared stuff here, and there's shared stuff there, and there's shared stuff on the ground floor and the roof. I think, no, this isn't what co-living, the stuff that we learnt about in Denmark and in Northern Europe, 40 years ago. This is, I don't think it should be called co-living, and some people might come back on that. But I think there's a huge difference between if you're going to build tall and you're going to have facilities. I think it's very important that you still have the same principles of design. I'm going to come to you, Melis, on this. The same principles of design in terms of your private space, your community space, your real community activities, and the feeling that it is home. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting challenge to create exactly that environment you're talking about. That really cohesive social environment, but that you can choose when to take part in that. So I'll give you a really practical example. In Holland, so as you know, to get to your home, often you use an external walkway. In Holland, there's a practice of saying, why don't we have the walkway with your balcony attached to it? I.e., your balcony is not on the other side of the building privately, it's part of the external walkway, and they call it the overgarden. And so in our project in Norwich, we sort of understood after a year of meeting these 34 families that there were different kinds of levels of wanting to interact with the central community space. So half the building have private balconies and a small walkway, and the other half have this sort of deep walkway where you can be really, you're always part of what's going on. And it was fascinating the day where the 34 families were all in a big room and they all had a red dot, and they'd all joined the group chronologically, and so they were able to put their dot on their home. And the people I thought were going to go for the quiet ones didn't, and it was all mixed around, I'd sort of pigeonholed people of wanting to live in a certain way. But yeah, I've got more to say on that, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Oh yeah, sure.
Kate, getting schemes off the ground and using Archeo, for example, how do you think that Camden Council and other councils, we'll talk London, are actually doing enough to get more schemes off the ground now?
I think they're doing as much as they can in the market that we've got. I think there are different ways of thinking about developing affordable housing, and I personally am very I'm proud to work for Camden Council, but there's more that could be done. I like the idea of getting the GLA to identify small sites. I think if you actually were to identify sites and market them for community land trusts, then you would obviously get more land, give more incentive. But the other thing I would say is that it's not just about owning your own home. A lot of the work that Archeo do is about how we consult with residents about the design of homes that will be next to them. So if you've got a site that's never had housing on it before, you can't go to the existing residents and say or if you haven't got a group of people. But if you are consulting with the neighbours in a really meaningful way, then you're actually starting to do co-design and starting to engage people in the idea of regeneration and change. And out of all those discussions, you never know what can emerge.
Stephen, in Denmark, the whole coming together and sharing is very much part of the Danish mindset. This, it's very much part of the Danish mindset, sharing, as opposed to what a lot of people would say in Britain might be, my home is my castle, and there's a big wall. And things are a bit different now, but I think there needs to be huge change. And I think that it's the whole grassroots level up rather than top down, but there needs to be some top down to release sites and things like that. But I think the whole thing about collaboration, people getting together, discussing what they want, and that, because when you did it, Jude, you quite early on got quite a big group of people. Well, I was going to ask Stephen about the Danish model of people actually getting together, because I think, 40 years down the line, it's kind of a learned thing now.
Well, I'm not quite sure if I agree entirely. I think there was a very strong socialistic society in the 70s. It was quite red. There was a lot of discussions, and it was all the universities have just had a revolution. There's a lot of things going on, which sort of encourage this kind of mentality. And I think there's been a tendency now to go towards more liberal.
It's your graph, you had those 3 phases.
Yeah.
I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And the most recent phase will be much sort of post 2000.
It's coming now.
It's coming. That will be a different context.
That's right. And if we go and jump forward, this whole non-profit housing mentality, the democratic way of organising themselves and making decisions together, is quite deep-rooted. But there's some research going on saying that some of the people who want to start up their own projects are often academics.
Yeah.
They're professionals who, they have an academic background, and maybe they're very quite resourceful economically, which means that they have a bit more clout. Whilst the other ones, which maybe in smaller communities, wanting to work together, it's maybe a slightly different situation. But the interesting point here is that quite a few, over 30% of them being built at the moment, are being built, 40%, by the housing associations. So this model, where you manage to get Hanover to buy the site, is something like that which is going on. To be able to buy the land, and we talked about this at lunch, over pizza. How do you get the entity to make it work? And that's not just about the democratic process, it's absolutely black and white. It's buying the site, which is a big challenge. So the housing associations have been very helpful here. And now with the pension companies getting involved, they've got the most money. And they're also organised professionally, and they have their own toolkits now. And they're making these turnkey projects. So they're using a lot of research and development to organise themselves.
Angela, can we have a few minutes Q&A before for the audience before we
Yes,
we wrap up?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, anybody got a question? Raise your hand and who else? That lady there. Yeah, hold on. Let's give you the microphone.
I've got one point and one sort of query. Just to say that actually both Hackney and Camden have an incredibly rich cooperative housing history, which I think is really important to remember that. Both from coming up in the 70s and the 80s, the squatting, short life, and through housing associations, there were incredible, particularly in Hackney, self-help communities. So that there was sort of separatist gay communities, there was incredible sort of hippie communities, and there's sort of a lot of those residual communities are still here, still there. London Fields East, Brougham Road, Shepherdess Walk, those communities still cooperatives. Some of the members have bought their property, and that brings me on. So I think it's really important to remember that this is not suddenly something being invented elsewhere, because there's a very, very rich tradition of it in London here. But the problem that's happened in London is obviously the massive commodification of housing. Is land values have actually made that kind of really inventive community almost impossible. And yet still, so much, as the Camden example shows, so much land is in public ownership, which, it's really good to hear the GLA, the Camden, that the government is gradually coming around to this idea that actually it's not just about actually providing people with housing, it's about this idea of bottom-up housing where people are enabled to actually come together in different ways. And what I'm really interested in, which hasn't really been discussed, is how that value is made. Because you're talking about buying sites, there is an opportunity for a lot of the public land to be actually put up for these community CLT, community land trust developments, in a way that the land is decommodified, that basically we are investing in new communities, in the idea of actually sort of in our future. I mean, it's, obviously sort of land prices, house prices in Hackney are terrifying as they are in Camden. So 8 schools have closed down in the last 2 years because actually people can't afford it. So people's children cannot reign here. There is going to be a sort of an emptying out, a hollowing out. So something that just hasn't come up really in the discussion is that idea that the way land value can actually be somehow brought into a way to make these feasible, and how when people either die or move out, how that value gets transferred back into the community rather than actually selling on at a commodified price.
Okay. Kate?
Good. So, in brief. So one of the ways in which value has flowed out of local authorities is through the right to buy. We have 33,000 homes, of which 9,000 have been sold. So the value of that home now belongs to an individual. So I'm very aware of so that means that's 9,000 homes that we don't have to let. The model that I talked about, the community land, that goes some way to addressing it. The sale to a community land trust is through a discounted market price, land price. But I'm afraid we won't, other than developing our own sites and keeping the homes that we build, which is what is our preferred way of developing. So we are building new council homes, and that's all the 17,000 homes that we built today are all council homes. We have to raise the funds to do that. So tackling the housing crisis in London at the moment is about finding temporary accommodation for people who are living on the streets. So to completely take your point about London has a housing crisis and a value crisis. I think that community-led housing is one way in which we can start to take more ownership or more responsibility, start to spread the benefits, as long as you don't sell them onto the right to buy.
Yes, and that somehow keeping the value in the community, so that it's not then sold on at a profit at a later date.
Well, by getting a planning consent with a Section 106 that secures the 50% affordable in perpetuity, and is the mechanism by which you can do that. So, for example, the NW3 example, they will have to maintain those 8 affordable homes in perpetuity at those costs. And the same for new ground, they have to be kept in perpetuity.
Yeah, it's very interesting because people don't want to sell outside of the group, so how do you do it, Julie?
Well, we have what we call non-resident members. We are a group where we get constant applications and interest in buying. So what we thought we'd do was we would develop a group of people in waiting really, so they are members of a group. They get to know us over time, and as and when something becomes available, it's offered to this pool of people who come along to different things we do, come along to talks, come along to summer parties, whatever. So they know us, we know them. So when we've been there 9 years, and only 3 flats have come up for sale in that. And when we moved in, we had people in their 80s and 90s, and we were talking about this earlier. People do live longer when they're in community. Of course, people can sit, and there are people, we're now the top end of people being, there's people in their 90s that were there from the last 40 years waiting. But they're well, and they're doing well, and but selling on, we have a group of people, and my family will inherit my flat, and they will then have a pool of people they go to, and they say, who's available, who wants to buy. We will not be selling them, I don't think, of course, at the prices we bought them, nobody does, but we get 3 valuations, and whatever the new valuation is, that will be sold. We will not get into bidding wars with our pool of people. One person will say, this is what it is, we'll do it. But we've also set something up where we have agreed we don't have to, but we have gentleman's agreement to put some money back into the community when we live, when we die, when we leave. So our heirs know that. It's in some of our wills that we put, you know, a percentage of the money that was made on those. As I say, people don't have to agree to it, but quite a few have. It's why we have money coming in.
Sorry, just a rider on that, Jude, but are you a charity? Sorry, are you a charity? No, so you wouldn't get a tax benefit like a big donation?
Yeah, no.
Time for one more question. Anybody else there? Within green here?
Yeah, I'm just interested in what your recommendations would be for how to go about finding a site.
For sale sign?
Talk to local councillors, walk your local areas.
I'd love the audience will have a lot to say about that. We worked with on the Community Land Trust project in Lewisham called Citizens House, which was the first purpose-built community land trust in London. I've got many community housing strings to my bow, but I think there's also a lot of GLA small sites programme is out there for small-scale developers to develop small sites, and we worked on a project with Barking and Dagenham where there's small sites where they were trying to release sites for community-led housing. So there are processes out there to try and identify sites specifically for community-led housing groups. I would just say one other community land trust group I work with worked really hard on political buy-in, which matters so much. This is a project in Greenwich where the now leader of the council was really involved in a grassroots community-led housing project. And I feel like he was quite fundamental in pushing this forward, and 2 sites were then released for community land trusts, which is very rare in my world that they are identified as being for community land trusts. I think we are kind of conflating 2 quite wildly different things. Community land trust, affordable housing, and co-housing is seen quite differently. It's very rare that a site for well, maybe Lev, I'm not sure, but co-housing might not be seen as some. Well, anyway, Lev, do you want to comment on that? Or am I Lev, fundamental as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Lev from Community Led Housing London, and you had our website on there earlier.
Yeah.
I think it depends what you think of co-housing. So one project that hasn't been mentioned very much is the Russ project in Lewisham. And if you go there, that was completed about a year ago, people moved in. It's got a real co-housing feel to it. They don't really call themselves co-housing, they're a community land trust, and I think we might see that in NW3 as well. And I think they come from different places, but actually they've got probably more in common than you might think. And I think even Ouch, where it's thinking about it as co-housing, has elements of community land trust. Like, it was really interesting to hear about some of the stuff you said in terms of how it's passed on to others and what that benefit looks like. There's so much I could say. I'll let others ask questions.
Finding sites is a fundamental challenge.
Thanks so much.
We had to get a site final in the end.
Yeah.
We go to 5 sites.
Right, we're going to, it's fascinating. We're going to have to discuss this over a glass of wine before we go. But I'd like to say thank you very much for everybody for coming. And you've got the last word.